God works in mysterious ways. Let's take a look at how he led Moses and his people out of Egypt, from a baby hidden in a basket to the leader of an exodus that shaped history. The birth of Moses and early life. Moses' story starts in a dangerous time for the Israelites, who had been slaves in Egypt for generations. The Egyptian Pharaoh, worried that the Israelites were growing too numerous, ordered that every Hebrew baby boy be thrown into the Nile River to control the population. But one mother, Jochebed, couldn't bear the thought of her son being killed. She hid him for 3 months, and when she could no longer hide him, she crafted a basket from reeds, coated it with pitch to make it waterproof, and set him afloat on the Nile. It was a desperate act of faith. Jochebed trusted that God would protect her baby, and he did. Pharaoh's daughter discovered the baby while bathing in the river. Moved by pity, she decided to adopt him, even though she knew he was a Hebrew child. In a remarkable twist, Miriam, Moses' sister, was nearby and suggested that Pharaoh's daughter hire a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby. Jochebed was brought to nurse her own son, giving her the chance to care for Moses in his early years, while knowing that his future lay in the royal palace. Moses grew up as a prince of Egypt would have, learning the ways of the Egyptians, while also holding on to the knowledge that he was a Hebrew. This dual identity would shape his future, as he would eventually have to choose between a life of privilege in Egypt or the suffering of his people. Moses flees Egypt. As Moses grew into adulthood, he became increasingly troubled by the oppression of the Israelites. One day, he witnessed an Egyptian taskmaster brutally beating a Hebrew slave. In a fit of anger and outrage, Moses struck the Egyptian, killing him. Realizing the gravity of what he had done, Moses buried the body in the sand, hoping no one had seen. But word of the incident spread quickly, and Moses became a wanted man. Pharaoh sought to kill him, and Moses fled for his life. He journeyed to the land of Midian, far away from Egypt. In Midian, Moses began a new chapter in his life. He met Jethro, a priest of Midian, and married his daughter Zipporah. For the next 40 years, Moses lived a quiet life as a shepherd, tending to Jethro's flocks. During this time, Moses likely thought his connection to Egypt was behind him. He had settled into a peaceful life, far removed from the pain and suffering of his people. But God had a different plan for Moses, one that would pull him back into the center of history. The burning bush and God's call. One day, while tending his sheep near Mount Horeb, Moses noticed something strange. A bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. As Moses approached to get a closer look, God spoke to him from the flames. God called Moses by name, telling him to remove his sandals because he was standing on holy ground. In this moment, God revealed his plan for Moses. He had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt and had heard their cries for help. God told Moses that he was sending him back to Egypt to lead the Israelites out of slavery. But Moses, filled with doubt and fear, questioned God's choice. He argued that he wasn't a good speaker, that he wasn't the right person for the job. But God reassured Moses, promising to be with him every step of the way. God also sent Moses' brother Aaron to help. Aaron would speak on Moses' behalf, allowing Moses to focus on leading. Armed with God's promise and a new sense of purpose, Moses returned to Egypt to face Pharaoh, a daunting task for a man who had once fled as a fugitive. The plagues and the Exodus. Upon returning to Egypt, Moses went before Pharaoh with a bold message from God, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh, hardened and stubborn, refused. In response, God sent 10 devastating plagues upon Egypt to show his power and to force Pharaoh's hand. The plagues began with turning the Nile River into blood, killing all the fish and making the water undrinkable. Then came swarms of frogs, gnats, and flies, followed by diseases that killed Egypt's livestock. Hail rained down from the sky, locusts devoured the crops, and darkness fell over the land for 3 days. Each plague grew worse, yet Pharaoh's heart remained hard. He refused to let the Israelites go. The final plague was the most terrible of all, the death of every firstborn in Egypt. Before this plague, God instructed the Israelites to mark their doorposts with the blood of a lamb so that the angel of death would pass over their homes. The death of his own son finally broke Pharaoh's resistance. He ordered Moses and the Israelites to leave Egypt immediately. After centuries of slavery, the Israelites were free, but the journey wasn't over. As the Israelites left Egypt, Pharaoh changed his mind once again and sent his army after them. Trapped between the Red Sea and the approaching Egyptian army, the Israelites were terrified. They cried out to Moses, asking why he had led them into the desert to die. But God had not abandoned them. He instructed Moses to raise his staff over the Red Sea, and as he did, the waters parted, creating a dry path for the Israelites to walk through. Once they had crossed safely, the waters returned, drowning the pursuing Egyptian army. This miraculous event solidified Moses' leadership and proved God's power to the Israelites. They were now free from Egypt, but their journey was just beginning. The journey in the desert. The Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, a time of both testing and miracles. They faced many hardships, including hunger and thirst. When they complained about food, God provided manna, a bread-like substance, from heaven. When they needed water, God instructed Moses to speak to a rock, and water would flow from it. However, Moses struck the rock instead, demonstrating a lack of faith. But the people's faith wavered. They often grumbled against Moses, and at times they even longed to return to Egypt, forgetting the harshness of their slavery. In one of their darkest moments, they built a golden calf and began to worship it, while Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments from God. This act of rebellion nearly led to their destruction, but Moses pleaded with God to spare them, showing his deep commitment to his people. Moses' role as leader was not an easy one. He constantly had to intercede between the people and God, and he faced many moments of frustration and doubt, but his faith in God's plan never wavered. Moses' struggles and his final days. Despite his leadership and faith, Moses was not without faults. In that one instance, when the people were complaining about water, God told Moses directly to speak to a rock to bring forth water. But in his frustration, Moses struck the rock instead. Because of this disobedience, God told Moses that he would not be allowed to enter the promised land. Despite all of his good work that far, this lack of faith was enough to force God to show Moses that any doubt of faith was unacceptable. Moses led the Israelites to the edge of the promised land, but it would be Joshua, his successor, who would take them in. From the top of Mount Nebo, God showed Moses the land he had promised to the Israelites. Moses died there, and the Bible says that God himself buried Moses in an undisclosed location. Though Moses never set foot in the promised land, his legacy lived on. He had led his people out of slavery, given them the law, and brought them to the brink of a new life. Moses is remembered as one of the greatest prophets in history, a man whose faith and obedience to God shaped the future of an entire people. If you enjoyed this short look into the life of Moses, please subscribe to our channel. Our little community grows every day, and we'd love to see you join us for our next biblical topics. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next time as we explore more inspiring stories from the Bible.